Welcome to the 5th episode in Channel Legendarium series about ancient Egyptian mythology. Today we'll be talking about the Egyptian creation myth. What we today call ancient Egyptian mythology dates back to at least 4000 BC, at least 1500 years before the first stone was laid on the first pyramid, and continued until the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 AD. And these beliefs did not stay in Egypt. Since Egypt was often at the center of what was then world trade, their beliefs spread through the Nile River Valley, then through the eastern Mediterranean, and finally across the Silk Road during the Roman era. Their ideas about eternal life after death, good-hearted gods, and reincarnation helped to inform belief around the world. They understood human existence as being only a small part of an everlasting journey presided over by the hundreds of deities in the Egyptian pantheon. The beginning of the cosmos, as described in Egyptian mythology, bears a striking resemblance to the universe before creation, as described in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, the universe was a swirling storm of endless dark water without form or purpose, and the only thing which existed in this void was Heka, the god of magic, who awaited the moment of creation. And when it came, Heka created a primordial hill called Benben, which rose out of the frothy black water. The shape of the pyramids would later be meant to recall the primordial hill of Benben. And upon this hill stood the first god, named Atum. Atum looked out at the nothingness and found himself very lonely. And as lonely men are wont to do, Atum masturbated into the emptiness. And since he was a god, his mating with the cosmos created two children, Shu and Tefnut. Shu became the god of air, while Tefnut became the goddess of moisture. In time, the two young gods longed for mates. However, they literally had no one to marry except each other. They asked their father Atum if they could marry, and an outraged Atum strictly forbade it. So, brother and sister fled the Benben. Atum ripped out his eye and sent it in search of them. During the long search, Atum sat upon the hill, thinking about eternity in the midst of endless chaos. And by the time the eye of Atum returned to him, with his two children, they were married, and Tefnut was already pregnant. Though angered, he allowed them to return to Benben to retrieve his loneliness. And in time, the union of Shu and Tefnut gave rise to a new generation of gods, with the most important being Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Sobek, the crocodile god. It is worth noting that the idea of incest among the gods in order to create a new order would later be reflected in Greek mythology, with Zeus marrying his sister Hera. Now, despite the incestuous roots of the union, Atum grew to love his grandchildren. Indeed, his tears of joy upon seeing his grandchildren became the first men and women as soon as they landed on the sands of the Benben. Now, this meant that Atum had to choose one of his grandchildren to create a world for them. Finding Osiris to be the wisest among them, Atum placed Osiris in charge of creating a place fit for human beings to live in. Atum then went and left the Benben to attend to his own affairs, and it is worth noting that Atum likely later became the sun god Ra, with his floating eye which went through the swirling nothingness, later becoming the all-seeing eye of Ra, one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt. For his first act, Osiris married one of his sisters, Isis, and together they planted trees to feed humanity with fruit. However, they learned that trees need water, so Osiris created a trench and commanded one of his brother gods, Sobek the crocodile god, to fill it with his own sweat, thus creating the Nile River. This began a golden age for humanity when all things were in harmonious balance. However, there was a snake in this particular garden, namely Osiris's younger brother Set, the wicked bringer of storms. He grew jealous of Osiris's power and glory and vowed to have it for himself. Indeed, the idea of wicked younger brothers growing jealous of glorious kings finds reflection in villains as diverse as Prince Claudius and Scar. So Set ordered his servants to take Osiris's measurements as he slept, and from those measurements he had his servants build an elaborate chest to those exact specifications. With the chest finished, Set threw a great banquet to which he invited all the gods, who by then numbered 72. And at the end of the party, Set offered the chest to whoever could fit inside it the best. And of course, Osiris fit inside perfectly. Once Osiris was inside, Set slammed the lid shut and threw the chest into the Nile River, but then declared himself king of the world. However, Isis refused to believe that her brother husband was dead, and she went searching for him. In time, she found his coffin inside a tree at the city of Byblos, in what is today Lebanon, and the people of Byblos, being good and pious, helped Isis to retrieve the coffin which contained her brother husband. Isis, in her gratitude, blessed them. And in time, Byblos would become the main exporter of papyrus throughout Egypt. It was believed that Isis thanked the people of Byblos by creating these papyrus stalks, which they would then export and make themselves wealthy. This particular detail may have been added by scribes to honor the city so important to the writer's trade. As Isis was bringing the body back to Egypt, she sent one of her sisters, Nephthys, to keep an eye on things at the god's house in the sky. However, Set became aware of Isis's extended absence from the court and grew fearful that she might resurrect him. So he got Nephthys very drunk one night, and she revealed what Isis was up to. Set then sent a storm, which Isis hurried off to protect people from. While Isis was away, Set went to his brother's coffin and chopped the body into 42 pieces before Isis could resurrect him, flinging the pieces across Egypt. When Isis found the coffin destroyed and the body gone, she fell to her knees and wept. Nephthys realized what had happened, and in her sorrow offered to help Isis recover all the pieces of Osiris's body so they could resurrect him. Wherever they found one of the 42 body parts, they built a shrine to it, and from these 42 shrines, the 42 provinces of Egypt were created by the two sister goddesses. This is an example of how the Egyptians believed that the gods had been intimately involved in the creation of their kingdom. However, they failed to recover one piece, Osiris's member, which had been eaten by a fish in the Nile River. One can only imagine that fish had quite a curse coming down on him. However, Isis made a replacement member out of wood and mated with her husband, becoming pregnant with the child who would become the falcon-headed god Horus. Now, even though the resurrection of Osiris was thwarted, his spirit was able to leave the coffin and his body and travel to the underworld, where Osiris became the king of heaven, what the Egyptians called the Field of Reeds. And every time a dead Egyptian went to the underworld, Osiris would assure them a fair judgment, and if they deserved it, a place in the Field of Reeds. The story of Osiris actually has many parallels to the life, ministry, and resurrection of Jesus Christ as described in the Gospel of Matthew, in which Christ is born, holds his ministry, is betrayed, dies, and ultimately is resurrected. However, there was also a happy end for humanity, as Set would not enjoy his ill-gotten gains for long. As mentioned, Isis was pregnant with Horus, and in time, Horus grew to manhood. He would have the body of a man and the head of a falcon and become the patron of the Egyptian pharaohs, obviously making him a very important man. And Horus became the patron of the pharaohs because he overthrew his wicked uncle Set and exiled him to the ocean, where he remained as the bringer of storms. This creation myth would be recounted upon sacred hieroglyphic writings found on pyramids, temples, tombs, and even sheets of papyrus. And this was a reflection of how the Egyptians saw the earth as a sacred landscape, a reflection of the sky world where the gods resided. And that wraps things up for this episode of Channel Legendarium and our first series on ancient Egypt. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, please leave it in the comment section. Thank you again for joining me.